everyone, my name is Annabel Megan, and today me and my partner Isabel from grade 11 social science is going to be discussing about the concept of demand and supply using the study case about sedent market for our economic practical test. So first, I am going to be discussing about the demand and supply, what they are. So they are basically the fundamental principles that explain how prices and quantities of goods are determined in a market. Demand is what consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices, while supplies are what producers are willing and able to sell. So in this case, we are mainly focusing on the supply, and we will see how changes in price and technologies could affect the quantity supplied and the overall supply curve. So first, let's imagine an automobile market where sedans are being produced. In simple terms, we can assume that all the sedans are identical and we sell them for the same price. Now, the two important factors that affect the supply of the sedan is technology and wages. The first one, which is technology, specifically the speed of manufacturing robots that can fasten bolts. The faster the robots, the cheaper and more efficient it is to produce the cars. Well, the second one, the wages, which is the rate that the auto manufacturers must pay their employees. The higher the wage, the higher the production costs will be, which can reduce the supply. So the starting point of the situation is that robots can fasten 2,500 bolts per hour. Auto workers can earn $25 per hour, and the price of a sedan is $30,000. And at that price, the quantity supplied per month is 250 sedans. So that is our baseline scenario. And let's imagine that the price of sedan falls from $30,000 to $25,000. What will happen is that producers now earn less revenue of each sedan they sell, because profit margins are smaller and many firms will cut back on production, so the quantity supplied will decrease. And on the graph, it will show the movement along the existing supply curve, not the shift. This is because when only price change, the supply curve does not move. Instead, we move from one point to another on the same curve. For example, point A could represent $30,000 with 250 sedans supplied. When the price falls to $25,000, we move to point B, where fewer sedans are supplied. It is an important distinction in economics, where movement along a curve is caused by price, while shift of the curve is caused by other factors such as technology, wages, or input cost. So let's look at a different situation. Imagine that the technology declines. For example, the robots become slower and can only fasten fewer bolts per hour. When the production becomes less efficient, the cost of making each sedan increases, so auto manufacturers now face higher costs, so they are less willing to supply as many cars at every possible price.
Continuing what Megan had said, this causes the entire supply curve to shift to the left. A leftward shift means that less is supplied at all prices. The opposite could also happen if technology improved and robots became faster. The supply curve would shift to the right, meaning more sedans could be produced at lower costs. This example shows how non-price factors like technology or wages changes supply. Now, how does this apply in the real world? Let me give you some examples. So the first one is price changes. When the global market price of cars dropped, many car companies reduced their production since producing at lower prices might not be profitable. That's a movement along the supply curve. The second one is technological changes. Think about Tesla and other electric car manufacturers. If they invent a faster, cheaper way to assemble batteries, their production costs will fall and supply shifts to the right. On the other hand, if there's a shortage of key materials like lithium, supply could shift to the left. Wages cost. In countries where labor costs suddenly rise, car manufacturers may reduce output and move factories somewhere else. Again, this is shifts in supply. So we can see that both everyday price changes and larger economic forces shape how many goods get supplies in the market. Even though our case study focuses on supply, it's important to remember that supply always interacts with demand. If supply decreases, but demand stays the same, prices tend to rise. However, if supply increases while demand is stable, prices usually fall. In our sedan example, if technology declines and supply shifts left, buyers will face higher car prices, and if prices fall instead, fewer cars will be produced because producers will earn less profit. This balance between buyers and sellers is what keeps markets moving. So, to conclude, a change in price leads to a movement along the supply curve, and a change in non price factors like technology or wages shifts the entire supply curve. A real world market constantly faces these changes, and understanding them helps businesses and governments to make better decisions. And in the Sedan example, when the price dropped from $30,000 to $25,000, the quantity supplied decreased, and that is called a movement along the supply in the curve. But when robots slowed down and costs rose, supply shifted to the left, and that's a curve shift. This case study clearly shows how supply responds to different factors in economy. Thank you so much for listening.